Hello, welcome to Mondays with Mira. First seduction, then deconstruction. And I'm going to seduce you with this wonderful picture book by Lemony Snicket. And then we're going to go and talk about what makes it so wonderful. Now this book has a lot of text, so I'm not going to read it all. I'll just read snippets and then I'll tell you what it's about and encourage you to either buy a copy or go to the library and check it out and just familiarize yourself with it so you learn the many wonderful techniques that are in here. Now Lemony Snicket is famous for the series of Unfortunate Events, and he has this very dry, sardonic kind of persona. Thank you, Marge. Created like the Marquis, written by Lemony Snicket. The composer is dead. I think this should have been smaller because it kind of gets a little confusing. Music by Nathaniel Stuckey and illustrated by Carson Ellis. So I'm going to try and do it in his droll voice. The composer is dead. Composer is a word which here means a person who sits in a room muttering and humming and figuring out what notes the orchestra is going to play. This is called composing. But last night, the composer was not muttering, he was not humming, he was not moving, or even breathing. This is called decomposing. The composer's death was very suspicious, and so the inspector was called in to find the murderer or murderers and haul them off to jail. I will begin by interviewing all the usual suspects. The inspector said. Like all people in his line of work, the composer had many enemies lurking in the orchestra. They can lurk all they like, but I will find them wherever they are lurking. I will find them if they are lurking in the strings. I will find them if they are lurking in the brass. I will find them if they are lurking in the woodwinds. I will find them if they are lurking in the percussion section. I will find them wherever they are lurking. I will find them. So it goes on to describe the inspector, and then he goes through and he, what's the word for it? Accuses. He goes through and he accuses. First I will interrogate the strings, he cried. So he goes through and he interrogates each section. First I will interrogate the strings, he cried. Strings, where were you on the night in question? The violins answered first, of course. The violin section is divided into the first violins who have the trickier parts to play, and the second violins who are more fun at parties. And so the violins explain why it wasn't them and why it couldn't have been them. But I'm just going to skip ahead to the end, which is kind of an evil thing to do to a writer. The inspector flipped through the pages of his notebook and scratched his handsome head with a well-manicured hand. I'm utterly baffled, he said. I've questioned all of the instruments in the orchestra, and none of them seem to be the murderer. The violins waltzed, the cellos and basses provided accompaniment, the violas mourned their fate, while the concertmaster showed off. The flutes did bird imitations repeatedly, and the reed instruments had the good taste to admire my jacket. The trumpets held a parade in honor of our great nation, while the French horns waxed nostalgic about something or other. The trombones had too much to drink, the percussion beat the band, and the tuba stayed home playing cards with his landlady, the harp, taking sips of warm milk from a little blue cup. But the composer is still dead. A strange noise caught the inspector's ear. Of course, he said. The conductor, you've been murdering composers for years. In fact, wherever there's a conductor, you're sure to find a dead composer. And then it just goes through. Beethoven dead, Bach dead, Brahms dead, Mozart dead, Haydn dead, Schubert unfinished but dead, Mahler dead, Chopin romantic but dead, Tchaikovsky dramatic dead, Stravinsky ecstatic dead, Schoenberg incomprehensible but dead, It's very clever, especially for anyone that knows about classical music. Dead composers litter the musical world, and it's all because of one man and one little stick. Arrest him at once. Not so fast, said the entire orchestra in unison. The conductor didn't work alone. All of us have butchered a composer at one time or another, but we also keep composers alive. Without strings and woodwinds, without brass and percussion, there would be no composing at all, except for various kinds of non-orchestral music. If you want to hear the work of the world's greatest composers, you're going to have to allow for a little murder here and there. But that's injustice, cried the inspector. Those who want justice, said the orchestra, can go to the police. But those who want something a little more interesting, and here's the kickoff, should go to the orchestra. So very clever. So you can see he's a master of language. He's really good at that droll voice. He's great at alliteration. He's great at rhythmic language that rolls off the tongue. And I love the litany of dead composers, and there's so much to love in this. So what this book actually does, besides really entertain, it's actually a concept book, but it's a concept book with a plot that builds and builds and builds, where it's not them, and then it's not them, and it's not them, and we go through all the different instruments. In the process of the inspector interrogating each of the musicians playing the different instruments, we learn about those different instruments and about their roles in the orchestra. And I imagine this book would inspire many a child to go to the orchestra that previously wouldn't have. And that's a terrific service, you know, to inspire and educate. So, and let me speak a little about the illustrations. I mentioned before that they were watercolor and silhouettes, and they're just very cleverly done. The other thing that's really wonderful is the use of white space, and that's a very skillful thing to do. And look how monochromatic this is. You know, we've got a little bit of pinky browns, a little bit of orange and yellow and grays. That's it. There's no bright colors in this, but that's perfect for the tone of this book. And they're very stylized. Look at the faces. And they're not necessarily, you know, exact proportions, or, you know, they're certainly not, photorealism, but they're delightful and very, very engaging. They've got a vintage look that goes with the feel of the book. The same with the type. So it's just really, really nicely done. So that's it for this week's Mondays with Mira. First seduction, then deconstruction. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope I managed to keep it fairly short. Oh, one last thing I want to add. If you do want to write a concept book, see how you can craft it into a narrative like this with a plot, where we start off, you know, we start off immediately. Our problem is the very first thing we see. The composer is dead. And then, of course, we want to know why and who killed him. So then the book goes through all the steps and all the obstacles in solving that problem. And I don't know that it really solves it all that successfully, but the book is very successful. And that's what counts. I think that you need to be a real super critical reader to say, well, who really did kill the composer and why? But it doesn't really matter, because what matters is the incredible amount of stuff that we learn and the delight we have in reading this book and looking at the pictures. So, another bye and thank you. See you next week.